Hi everyone, in today's video I want to show you how to make and how to use loot filters in Last Epoch. This is a question that keeps coming up all day long on my streams, literally 1,000 times a day. And people always ask me, what is my filter and how do you optimize it? How do I make sure that I see enough items or not too much? And it seems to be a general problem with the game. Now, Last Epoch is designed in a way that you are supposed to use loot filters, and if you don't, well, you'll have a problem really soon. Basically, starting at level 5, you want to use loot filters. And I will show you how to make them or how to use them and how to understand how an efficient loot filter actually works. So I have an example here. This is also something I've already shown in my other video, for example, my Falconer guide, where I actually included this loot filter here. But I will go through it step by step and show you how I would build this. So just to give you a bit of an overview of how this filter works right now, this is a very endgame character. You see here I'm level 100. I have really like endgame gear pretty much, everything exalted and like some legendaries and basically everything you could hope for. I've been playing this character for like 80-90 hours now or something. So this is pretty decked out. So obviously I need an extremely strict filter because I'm farming like 600 or so corruption, and there is, like thousands and thousands of items dropping every single run, and I don't want to pick up more than 2 of them. So this means that I have to make a very strict filter. So this is what we have here, for example. So you see this here, I have several rules going from the top to the bottom. The top rules always take priority over the bottom rules. So this is kind of important to remember when you like rearrange them. You can just like, drag and drop them. And also I have very strict filters for example, all these item types that I'm looking for. In this case, for example, I'm still looking for a belt upgrade. So I have a pretty decent belt here, but it could be better. Of course, everything can always be better. And this means I still want to find some GG belt at some point. And if you look at, for example, what we have here is that I have selected belts. It should show me exalted belts with the rarity. And then we have the item type. And then we also have the subtypes, so the bases basically. And I selected only the 2 GG subtypes here. And it only shows me exalted, Praetorian belts or these spider silk sashes. And then I also select a bunch of affixes that I want for this build. So in this case, basically what you want to do is at the start, you want to set up one filter that has all of the stats that you could possibly want for your build. In my case, I want a lot of dex, crit, minion damage, mana, and then of course on the defensive side, I want like life and resist basically. And this is kind of like all the stats that we have selected here. And they are part of basically every single filter almost exactly the same way. And like this, I see very few belts, but whenever one of them drops, I know that this is going to be one that could possibly be something at least, because I know it will have at least one exalted stat of the stuff that I want. Because, for example, you can also check the advanced options here in the affixes, and you can say, okay, this should be at least tier 6, or it should be at least tier 7, or it should also have, a combination of multiple of these affixes. So you can say, okay, it should have at least 2 or 3 of these affixes, and they should all be at least tier 5 or, these kind of things. So like this, you can actually like fine tune your filter for each individual item slot, depending on what kind of drops you get. So I do pretty much exactly the same thing for all of these item slots here. For example, here I want only falconry helms, which is like the base to have on a falconer build. I have 2 different body types here. I have, 7 types of boots. There's actually a lot of options. But ultimately you can make it stricter and stricter as you progress. So in my case, at this point, I pretty much only want the citadel boots anyway, but I do look at the boots from time to time because there could be like a really juicy drop, and kind of similar with all the other types here. So this is kind of like how I go through this, and this is how I can actually make sure that I see the loot that I want, especially once you're in empowered monoliths. Now, of course, if you use this filter and you're like level 60 or so, just fresh out of the campaign, well, you're not going to find a lot of exalted falconry helms that have exactly a stat that you want. So in that case, I also have a less strict version of this filter. For example, here I have kind of the same thing that also shows rares, not just exalted. And here, for example, I have the same stats selected, but it should be at least 2 of them, and it should be at least tier 3. So no exalted really required. And like this, occasionally you're going to see some of these falconry helms pop up, even though they're rare. And they have a different color here. You can recolor them on the side here. We can select the color, so there's like an orange, which shows me that this is not just any rare, but this is actually an item that, you know, I specifically filter for. And I have a bit of a distinction there compared to a typical rare. So you see here, rare is like this yellow, and then this is orange, and then kind of has its color progression, and red is like the GG stuff, basically. So earlier on, for example, or if I just get really unlucky with those helms, I just check this, and then I will just see more of those helms, or I will see more of those belts, or anything like that. So, you know, I just did this here, and then as I was progressing earlier on through the monoliths, I was actually finding rare falconry helms as well, and, well, they don't always turn out that great, but it's something, and eventually you'll find one, and then you can just check this off, and you just look for the more juicy stuff later. Now, there are some other important things to include here in such a loot filter. For example, in my case, there is one really important unique item in this build, which is the Tailends of Valor, which is this falconry bow. And in that case, you want to use your runes of ascendance as much as possible on those to try to get, like, you know, high legendary potential like this one. So in that case, I also have a filter here for ascendancy bases. So especially if you're playing a Circle of Fortune, you have to look at these quite a lot because you have a lot of rune of ascendance. But even without, for example, I just made a filter here. It just should show me, you know, bows, and I also had amulets here because I tried them on amulets for a while, and I have them recolored as well to, for example, blue. And then I know, okay, I see a blue item. This means that it didn't actually meet any of those requirements up here for like a good item that I might want to use. So instead, I just pop a rune of ascendancy on it, and boom. But right now, you know, I'm kind of done with my gear here, so I'm not doing that anymore. But this is definitely something worth including in a filter if you're looking for something. Then we have hide all off-class items. So basically just do like a class requirement condition and just select everything that you're not using. Of course, if you're playing Merchant's Guild, then this might be a bad idea because you could find really juicy, high-value items for other classes. So you might have to fine-tune this a bit, but at least for solo play, this is how you do it. Then I also have a filter where I hide all exalted items with all the stats exalted that I don't want. So in that case, anything that has a tier 5 or higher of any stat I do not actually want to use. So in that case, you know, it just kind of like filters out a lot of the exalted items that, you know, they just don't have anything I want, or they have like kind of like a blocked affix, or like, you know, you can't like Cliff of Chaos and affix anymore if it's tier 5, for example. And I don't really want to, like, you know, gamble rune of removal on an item that, you know, I could maybe get rid of a stat and then craft something else. Most of the time, it just doesn't really work out. So at this point, I just hide everything that has like at least a tier 5 stat of something I don't want. But this rules here still takes priority. So I can still find, for example, like a GG belt base with one exalted stat that also has a tier 5 mod of something I don't want. So that is still included up here, but I kind of like get rid of all the other like exalted trash basically down here. Then I also like to make a filter for experimental stats. So there might be some experimental stats that you might want to use. So you can actually just, you know, filter for item affix again. And there's this drop down here for experimental stuff. And, you know, there's like a few stats that could apply to my build. These are like 2 boots mods, and this is, I think, glove. And I think those two are both gloves. So there I want nothing on the belt because everything is trash for me. But at least those could be useful. And then you could also say, okay, I want them with, you know, at least, you know, tier 3, for example. And then, you know, every time you kill an exiled mage and one of those items drops that has one of these experimental stats that you might want to use, well, you'll see it. In this case, I've already like checked this off. I'm not really using that anymore. And in fact, I'm not even using like experimental stats pretty much at all. I have one random one on the belt here, but this was just like some leftover basically. So for me, this is not too relevant, but for some builds, this is kind of important. So you want to probably put that further up. Yeah, and then lastly, if you look at this here, basically any item that makes it through those filters here up or top where, okay, either it is one of the good bases with good stats, then it will shown as red, or it is hidden because it has a bad stat. So I hide the bad stat exalteds first, and then I also show the tier 7 exalteds and the tier 6 exalteds for legendary potential. So in that case, you know, anything that makes it through this hide the bad stats thing will still show here as, for example, a green color. So this is this one. So it's kind of like the same thing where, you know, I select all of the stats that I possibly want for my build. So we have, you know, the stuff here, and we have you know, the res, the bow damage, the crit, whatever, these kind of things that I want. And this is at least tier 7. And it doesn't have like at least a tier 5 of, you know, a bad stat. So I don't have to gamble rune of removal on it, for example. But anything that makes it through this will be shown here as a tier 7 exalted, which doesn't happen too often. So you just pick them up and most of the time you just throw them in a stash as like a potential use case for, you know, making a legendary, for example. And the same thing here, T6 exalted. At this point, yeah, I would probably turn this off here, or at least make this more strict, but at least early on this might be useful as well. It's not just tier 7 exalted that you want to use for making legendaries most of the time, because these tier 7s are just pretty rare. So early on at least you will need those tier 6s. So I have exactly the same filter, just with like a different condition here for the tier basically. And then, yeah, we have a bunch of other filters down here that I don't use anymore. For example, mid-game exalted items. So this is basically, I just select all of the armor and weapon types that I actually use, like bow, quiver, all the armor types. Doesn't matter what kind of base, it just should have any exalted stat that is at least tier 6. And this is something that I use, for example, in like the early monoliths or like early empowered monoliths, when exalteds really start dropping quite a lot. And then occasionally, yeah, you find like a decent item that actually has, you know, a bunch of good stats. And again, we hide the stuff with the bad stats. So in that case, you end up with not the right base, but at least like a decent item. And like this, you can, you know, progress. But in this case, I'm already not showing these anymore. But I do show, for example, double exalted. So this could be still useful, for example, for legendary potential, or maybe I get like some insane double exalted drop that could, you know, outweigh one of those bases that I have chosen earlier up. Yeah, and then we're also pretty much done with this filter. So the only stuff that is left are the idols. So something that I recommend doing is for idols, I would make a separate filter. And actually I have 2 of them. So you see here I have idols with 1 good stat. This is something that I just used like early on up to like, I don't know, level 90 maybe or something. So I just go through all the idol stats and I just check everything that I would possibly want for idols on my build. So there's a bunch of stuff here on the general stuff, like resistances in particular, and then also a bunch of like rogue specific stuff, for example. And well, at this point I have so many idols, like I actually started sorting them out, and I'm only looking for the juicy 2-stat idols. So you see here I have double health, etc, etc, etc. I found so many of them at this point. I don't care about the 1-stat idols anymore. And we have basically everything we want here already. So in that case, I just show the 2-stat idols and I check this one off. It's literally the same filter. The only difference is that I selected have at least 2 of those affixes instead of 1. So this is also kind of nice. Then down here, basically, I think this is actually redundant because I have like hide basically everything. So this is kind of like the last rule that you include here. You just, for example, select item type and then you just select everything. And this means that basically everything that is not actively shown on your filter is hidden. Because as I mentioned, there's literally thousands of items of dropping in every single map. So you need to make sure that all that stuff is getting filtered. And well, you do this like relatively early. So in that case, I just hide everything that doesn't make it into like, you know, show this or that kind of filter basically. And lastly, something that I also recommend doing at least very early in the progression. So let's say starting from, you know, somewhere late campaign up until like empowered monoliths maybe, is to just show any rares that have any of the stats that you want, but at least 3 of them or something like that. So this is something that I have here, for example. So it doesn't have any, it doesn't really take any regard in like what item type is this filter, or like what base, but it does have, for example, you know, triple like double res and like a dexterity roll, or, you know, like vitality, dexterity and 1 res, or dexterity and res and health. And basically everything here that I also want for my build is selected here. So kind of like the same stuff again. There's health, there's resistances, and so on. At least 3 stats. And like this, you quite regularly actually find just some decent rare items on the ground that you can use. You can also make this like more strict as you go. Here, for example, I just have it, okay, individual item tiers, individual affix tiers must be at least 3, but the total affix tiers must be at least 10. So this means you can find like, you know, 3, 3, 4, or you can find 3, 4, 4, or you can find 3, 5, 5, or something like that of certain things that you want on your item. And having a rare that has 3 good stats, even if the last stat is just something completely useless for you, is usually already decent enough early on, until you find more of those exalted loot and just more GG items with 4 out of 4 stats of something you want. So this is something that I use for like the early monolith progression basically. It does show you a lot more stuff than the much stricter filters up here, but it makes sure that you actually still get items. But in my case, I have this not checked, of course, because as I mentioned, this is like really high end already. But it's like a very effective, very simple way of actually just showing a lot of rares, and then you can just throw them in a stash, and then you can build a bank of just a bunch of items that you can use to eventually fix your resistances, fix your, I don't know, armor, crit avoidance, whatever, these kind of things. And, you have like a bunch of stuff to mix and match, even though they're not necessarily the right base. Early on, you just can't really expect to get all the right stuff right away, but it gives you some stuff to work with, basically. So that's how I have set up my filter, and it is actually very effective. Now, of course, there might be some tweaks you have to do for like especially early campaigns, so you can just add more rules here as well. So one other thing you can do is that you can also set level requirements for certain rules. So it automatically changes it and switches it on or off. So you can say this here, for example, character level dependency. You can say that for like the super strict filters, they should only start at level 80 and then go to 100 or something. And likewise, you can actually include campaign filters, 1 to 20, 1 to 50, whatever, whatever you want, and actually have everything in one filter. And for example, for the campaign, I actually can show you what I have there. So I made this here for the campaign where I did level with shadow daggers instead of a bow. So I was showing a bunch of different items here. For example, Chris is a very important base to have. So whenever one of them drops, I show it big. Maybe boots that drop, like especially early on, who wants any kind of boots with movement speed just to go faster. Then later on, I also show, for example, boots that have higher tier of movement speed. So you see here the character level dependency is 0 to 25, here 26 to 100. So this is like, a few more rules they could include in such a loot filter to show a few things. And also shattering items. So this is kind of important. I have a bunch of shatter filters here as well that I show usually far at the top. So for example, while leveling up on this build, I really wanted melee physical damage, and I really wanted this throwing mana cost reduction. And I think I also have something here for like movement speed and stuff like that. But either way, I was trying to like stack up a bunch of items that are shatter for shards, because especially early you don't really have those shards. I have the same thing here on my endgame filter as well, which right currently I don't really have any need anymore, but I have 2 shatter filters here that you can see. So number 1 right at the top is basically all of the class specific stuff. You see here I've basically selected everything on rogue, because all of this stuff is usually very rare. And what happens is that very often you're going to have a helm or a chest that can have these class specific stats, and you randomly have one of these stats present and you cannot craft on the item anymore. So you can't use like a glyph of chaos, for example, to actually change this stat into potentially something better. So in that case, at least for a while, I usually run this filter here and just shatter every single item that shows up as white here, for example, and just build a bank of these shards, even though I don't really want to craft with them, but I actually have a bunch of shards so that I can craft on other items and remove those stats. And likewise, I have a second special shatter filter here, where I just show anything that I need right now. So sometimes you just pick an item and you have like, a good item that you want to craft on, but again, you don't have that rare shard of the stat that it has. So this has happened sometimes. Maybe I can find an example here if I look at some of these stats here. But here's like one of these examples. Let's say I want to craft on this helm. And, if I want to get rid of this Dark Quiver mod here, then I have either the Rune of Removal or I can do the Chaos. And in this case, I cannot do the Chaos if I don't have the shard. But like this, boom, I got Vitality. And this is kind of the sum of the crafting you want to do. So this is why I have this rare shard filter, basically. And similarly, I have like a second filter for something that I need immediately to show even, further up beyond this other one. Where it's just like, okay, I have this item, I want to craft on this, and I'm missing this one thing. So I really want to highlight it. So sometimes this also happens with kind of like rare stuff. Let's say health and stun avoidance is like one of those stats. It's like really, really rare. Also, like kind of rare is like the hybrid health. Hybrid health is a really powerful stat. So this is like the stuff that I also have here in the filter to just show up, and I shatter it, I get a bunch of shards, and I have them ready for crafting later. Yeah, now I can try to make a loot filter kind of in this style for you live. So I'm going to try to do this. We're going to just create a new filter here. So we just say plus. Then we do test filter, and then we can basically build exactly what I have just described in the previous part of the video. So we start with, well, we hide everything. So this is like what I mentioned. This is like one of these rules here. Just at the bottom, we hide everything. So we go, boom. And then we do another rule, and we do item affixes. And now we go through the item affix list, and we select everything that we could possibly want for our build. Now, some of these stats might not actually even appear on the items that you're actually trying to get. For example, there's all attributes, which I believe is a stat on two-handed melee weapons, which does not apply to my build, but I just check it anyway. You don't actually need to know which item has this stat, so you can just check it, you know. But I want dex, I want vitality. Then we don't want any of the melee stuff, of course. We don't want any of the spell stuff, but we want bow stuff. So we want bow damage, and we want a crit chance and a bow attack speed and the bow physical damage. And then we have damage type here. I think this is where we have it's like the pen stuff. Here you want this physical pen, for example. It's kind of important for my falconer build. Then we have general stuff. We want crits. And then we have health. We want basically everything. So flat health, percent health, hybrid health. Then we have resistances. So here we want all of these. And then we also, all resistances I think is a shield stat, but again, you can just check it, you know, when you see it, why not? Endurance could be something, physical resist, okay. Then potion, we don't want anything there, we don't want any dodge, we don't want anything here, we don't want anything here. We want health and stun avoidance, which is a pretty powerful stat as well. We want crit avoidance, because you want to get 100% crit chance of reduction, basically. You can also go for the reduced bonus damage taken from crits as well, depends on the build. There's also this armor and reduced bonus damage from crits that can be kind of nice. Then we have nothing here. Of course, you want movement speed, you want cooldown reduction, you want mana regeneration. Then we want minion. We don't need minion health on this build, but yeah, we can do minion, melee, and bow damage, for example. And then there's a bunch of ailments, so chill is kind of nice. Slow could be nice. And shred could be nice, and frailty is going to be nice. And then we have a bunch of rogue-specific stats. So there's a lot of things here usually. In that case, you just kind of like, you know, skim through this. There's not really all that much here of stuff that I would actually want. We can do increased damage while wielding a bow, because that in this build transfers to our pet. We can also do the chance to shred armor, for example. We can do armor shred effect, perhaps. And well, further down here, we're also going to have some of these skills that we actually use. So in this case, we use the dive bomb and the falconry, most importantly. And there's also damage and area with dive bomb, so I can show that. And yeah, that should be also pretty much it, I guess. And then you can also do the experimental stats, I guess. So if you want to do that in one filter, you can do it, but I usually like to have a second filter there. Yeah, and this is basically all of the stats that I could ever want on this build. And we say, boom, this is our filter here. And now we can use this, we can actually copy, paste all these affixes and then make separate restrictions out of this. So for example, what I just explained, we're going to start with like the you know, less strict filter, for example. So we say, okay, there should be you know, either at least 2 or at least 3, but let's say at least 3 of these stats, and then say they should all be at least tier 2. And yeah, show me any of those basically. And then we also add in a condition and we say item type. So it should be bows, quivers, all the armor, all the accessories, and we don't want to see all these like other weapon types basically. So this is kind of what we're doing here. So I don't get flooded with two-handed melee weapons that I don't actually care about. And we say, yeah, this is basically it here. So it shows me all the stuff. And then, you know, this is like kind of like the less strict version, like the least strict version of this filter here that we kind of care about. I also realized, for example, one mistake. I did not actually hide. I should selected show. So here for like, you know, hide everything. This was supposed to hide. So make sure that you do that. What I see now we're showing a lot of rare items that have at least 3 of those stats of the stuff that we want. And now we can copy paste this here. You see this here. I can just click on this button and then we put this up here. And now we make this more strict. So now we select only one item type. So we select everything here. And we say, let's say helmets. And now you can also select the subtypes. So when you have only one item type here, you can also select the base that you want to use. So in that case, we check the rogue, and we say, okay, we want this base, and we want the falconry base, and we want this one with the res. You might want to use the exile head, and maybe even this one here has a lot of armor and cooldown recovery speed. That seems kind of nice. So we're basically picking like the best 5 bases here. And now we can also do this recolor stuff. So we say, okay, these are like some actual bases that I care about. So we can do like this orange color here. And, you know, again, we can do like the same stuff here with, you know, at least 2 of these mods, but it's the right base. Or we can also say something like at least 2 mods, but it should be like at least tier 3. So you can kind of like fine tune it a little bit depending on what kind of items you already have. But for example, if you're starting out, you want to make this a bit less strict and then maybe just go back in later and like, you know, make it 3 stars instead of 2, or make this tier 4 instead of tier 3 or something like that. So depending on what you find. But then we say, boom. So this shows us, you know, the better bases and recolors them so that we know, okay, this is something kind of like to look out for. And now we can do the same thing again. We duplicate this rule again. And now we say, okay, we want to have at least one of these stats, but it should be at least tier 6. So now we're looking for only the exalted stuff. So you can just say, okay, this is going to be like, you know, purple because it's exalted. And again, you can do this with the same types here, for example. Or you can also make this more strict and then just select, you know, only the best type that you want. But we can just do this here, for example. So this is like going to be the same thing, but we know it's going to be exalted with one of the good types. And if you want, you can copy this again, and then you say, okay, now we're only really going for like, you know, the top 1 base. So this is like a falconry helm in my case. So you only want to see this one, and we're gonna recolor this as well. And we say, okay, boom, red. So this is like the GG one basically. So if you find an exalted falconry helm with one of the stats that you want, it will show up as a red. And like this, you know, as I mentioned, as you progress, you know, you're gonna start with all of them checked, for example. And then at some point you find a decent helm, you check this off. At some point you find a better helm, you check this off, and so on. And at some point you just leave this one up here, basically. So this is kind of how we do this. And then you can do exactly the same thing with all of the other items. So again, we can do, you know, this, for example. And now we say, you know, we remove this item type restriction here. And now we do this with belt, for example. So we do item type, we do belt. And then we say again, okay, we want to see, you know, only like, you know, this space, those are the 2 best spaces here. But maybe early on, you know, you can't really choose. So we also take this one and maybe also this one. And so we have like, you know, a bit more options here basically. And again, we want to see at least 2 of the good stats with at least tier 3, etc. Boom. So now we have the same thing for the belts. And now we do the same thing here. We do, we take this filter, remove the item type. We put this here, and we say only the best 2 belt types, for example. So we only want to see the, you know, the spider silk sash and the Praetorian belt, those 2, and they should be exalted. And now they're red, and there you go. And like this, you kind of go through one by one for all of these item types. So there's 5 different armor types. There's, you know, my bows and quivers, and, you know, you just select the best bases and just make stricter versions of those filters. And because you can always copy paste, it's actually very simple to do. And then you have like a clear color coded filter where, you know, okay, red is like the best, orange is the second best, yellow is, you know, just rares basically with the good stuff. And you also have like maybe something in between here with the exalted. So, you know, any exalted helm or something. So let's say I do this for all of the other types as I had just described earlier in the video. Now we also want to make the rules for some other items. So for example, we show all uniques. So you just do this here, you show all uniques. It's kind of fun to like hunt down like legendary potential items. Of course, if you show all these items, you don't necessarily want to pick them all, but it might be interesting. You might want to get some ideas for some other builds or whatever. You can also make a condition here that, you know, it should be only rogue specific or something. Or, you know, like, or you can hide stuff that you don't want. Or you can say, okay, item types, I only want to see unique bows and unique amulets, because that's really the only stuff I care about. However, you know, you can find these like super high legendary potential, like 3 legendary potential, 4 legendary potential items. So probably not really recommended to go too strict here, but you could do something like that as well. But you can just show all the uniques, and then you do that. And again, we do like a shatter filter. So I mentioned that. So this is going to be affixes, and then we say, okay, we shatter everything that is rogue specific. So we build a bank, and we just say, okay, we recolor this to white. So we don't actually find white items. I just do this with white because I know, okay, this goes immediately into the shredder. And boom, we do that. And then we have the idols. So let's do the idols. So again, we go with affix, and then you go down here, you do general idols, and we say, okay, we want health, res, health. We want maybe this here, all the resistances. We can maybe check the dodge and the armor for like the 1 slot idols or something, just to have something early on. We want vitality, we want crit, and what else is here? There's a shared physical damage that also works on minions. And then we go to the rogue idols, and there's also a lot of really random stuff here, so you kind of want to like sort this out a little bit. And most of the time, a lot of stuff will not apply, but we can take this here, for example. And there's also a shred on bow hit, that's kind of nice. Armor shred maybe, and bow damage. And then there's a lot of like skill specific stuff here where we don't really care. And that is a shared crit multiplier as well. This is for the pets. And that is pretty much it here. So you just select all of this. And now this is our, show idols. You can also rename these things, by the way. You can just say, okay, idols with 1 good stat. Boom. So we do this here. It doesn't really matter. It just make sure it's like above the hide everything thing. And then you do a copy of this, and we say, okay, you should have at least 2 of these stats. So we also rename this, of course. Idols with 2 good stats. And if you want, you can also like, for example, emphasize them, or you can also, recolor them. But you can just say this here, okay, this is like a big item basically. This is like a bigger idol, so you want to pay attention to this. But again, later on, you can just uncheck this and you just leave the filter there, and there you go. And that's also pretty much it. So you see that in basically, like if I wasn't explaining this stuff all this time, I could actually make a filter like this in like 5 minutes or so that actually already filters like basically 95% of the right stuff for me. And then you can always like, fine tune it, and maybe sometimes there's like an item showing up and you look at it and like, why the hell do I want to see this? And then you just go back to the filter and you see, okay, maybe I missed like 1 rule or something, or maybe you rearrange them in the wrong order. So the order matters. Always remember that. The order always matters. So the top rules are always priority over the bottom rules. And well, like this, you can just build your filter as well as you go. And sometimes you realize, okay, maybe I want to try, rune of ascendancy on a different base now. So it's going to take your ascendancy base filter and then say, okay, I'm going to try, boots now. So maybe you got the big bow, and let's say you have like this ascendancy filter here that I showed earlier. So we say, okay, recolor, this is like blue for the ascendancy, or ascendance filter. And let's say, okay, I don't want to try bows anymore. I don't want to try amulets anymore, but now I'm going to take boots. And I'm going to try my luck and try to get like 3 LP boots or something with a rune of ascendance. So you just do this. And you just change that. And then it just will show up. So it's usually like, just a matter of seconds in actually like changing a certain filter around to suit your needs. And again, you can always go back. You can add extra rules. You can always, try to figure out, better ways of filtering out certain items. But if you just take a time after learning how the system works, and I hope that I explained it pretty well, it doesn't really take more than like 5 to 10 minutes to set up a decent filter already for your character to go all the way basically to the 100. And again, you can always come back and, between a run or so, if you realize, okay, something is missing, you just add an extra rule for it, and there you go. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, this has served me pretty well, the way that I structure my loot filters. So I just make sure that, I basically never really pick up stuff, and I just see the stuff that I want to see most of the time. And then you can just go and you can, build a bank of items here, either for use or for, potential crafting. Or, for example, I also have, high-end crafting bases here. For example, I have like, tons of these, like exalted citadel boots, like the best base type, with like a tier 6 or tier 7 stat here. So something that I might want to use to actually craft a better item at some point. However, my boots are pretty hard to beat, to be fair. So this doesn't really happen anymore, but for example, for my alts, this could be something. So I also like organize my stash a little bit like this here. So I have a lot of these here, I have a bunch of these belts, And at some point, I just do like a crafting session, for example. I take like all of the bells. So I just do like, I take all of these here. You see how many of these exalted spider silk and praetorian bells I have. And then I just see, okay, what can I do with them? And the thing is that high-end wise, at least, most of these crafts will just prick in the first 1 or 2 attempts of actually doing something with them, because they have a certain stat I need to remove or something like that, and I just remove the wrong stat. So that happens very frequently. So you want to collect a bunch of these at once, and then like do like a crafting session with like, 20 of these items at once or something like that. And then eventually you're going to get an upgrade. So that's kind of how that works later on, at least. But early on, you can easily just get away with, some T6 items that have like a good stat on them, craft a bunch of res, craft a bunch of life or something like that. And you don't have to like risk all too much and potentially brick the item. So you can just go with what you get. And then over time, you're gonna like, step by step improve your gear up to a certain point where the gamble just becomes much like more difficult to get hit, basically. But basically just like, using these filters to stack up a bunch of different options. You see here I have like, exactly these ancient coins, relics. This is exactly the best base type that I want for my build. And there's like, 6 different options here that I gathered. And, in case I need to get, for example, a different resistance on this thing, I can use this as a crafting base and then go from there. So here's one of poison res, here's one of poison and void, and here's one where I actually have an open suffix, so I can craft anything, and so on. So in that case, if I actually need to replace my relic because I need to swap around some resistances, I can try to do something with these. So just throw them in there, whatever shows, and then maybe at some point you also want to sort out some of the old stuff. So I think I actually have done that for the most part, but you see here I still have like some super outdated, there's like some super old stuff that showed in my filter. You see here, this is just a rare with 3 stats that I actually checked, the vitality and res and res. This is like one of those examples. So this no longer shows on my filter. But I think if I check this thing now, it would show. Maybe it's also hidden at this point because it probably has like some like lower level item there. Actually, I think my filter is bugged right now because even when I press X, it doesn't show. Because usually when you press X, it disables the loot filter. But something is wrong here, but this one shows. Interesting. But yeah, in any case, this is like one of those old items, but you want to sort them out, and you want to make sure that, they don't get overloaded in their stash with like all this like super old stuff. So at least whenever you have like these big progression steps, I would say, for example, going from campaign to monoliths and then going from normal monoliths to empowered monoliths, I would take some time to, look at everything you have in your stash, craft a whole new set of gear basically, or improve all the stuff that is bad, and then just kind of like throw out most of the really outdated stuff, just to make sure you don't overload your stash with a bunch of old trash. But yeah, this is basically how that works. So I hope this helps you, and maybe you learn something from making your own filters, or at least understanding filters that you download. So for example, I have my own filter here for my Falconer. I have this in my Falconer guide, and people that use this guide, they might not be level 100 and might not have GG items like me, of course. So in that case, you always have to go and kind of fine-tune the filters at least a little bit to your own needs. Like if you're level 70, well, you can't just show all the GG stuff only, you have to show some other stuff, because else you're not gonna find any item ever, basically. So at the very least, you would have to go in and you have to go, check this stuff, and you have to understand, what this filter actually does. So, as I explained, for example, earlier, like, it shows all of the good stats that I can possibly want on this build, but, with some of those restrictions. For example, it needs to have 2 stats, it needs to be at least tier 3 stats, and so on. So, you can just check and uncheck some of these things, for example, in my filter. But if you have other people's filters, or if you make your own filter, well, you kind of need to understand those different, like, rarity levels, basically. So that's it for this video here. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helps you. I wish you good luck with Last Epoch. Stay tuned for more stuff. Let me know what else you would like me to cover, actually. So I'm still planning to put out a bunch more Last Epoch content, and just hope everyone has a good time. See you guys next time.